What's up, guys? Gons here for the Face Like the Sun channel. As you can see, I got myself a webcam, and I'm not going to really show my face all the time, but I thought every once in a while it'd be good because I'm a real person, you know, and so here I am. This is a video of me and Justen Faull having a conversation about his new documentary film, Higher Entities, The Lost Tapes, and we would get into all the people that he had discussions with, and you should go check out the film if you can. But even if you can't, in this video we go over all of the big takeaways from the documentary. He spoke with Ray Boeche. Tom Horn tells a really personal story that he's been concealing for all these years, but it's not concealed in like a bad way, but just he didn't make it public until this documentary. But one thing I wanted to mention and warn is that I tried to do this green screen thing, this giant green pad, which if I key out, you could probably see that, you know, it could be used as a green screen. So I had it set up behind me. But as you can tell, this is, I have a very small work space here. This is my closet door. And the camera is literally in the closet here and everything. But anyway, you can see my kitchen in the background. And you can see the glare happening, this bright glare right here. Ooh, looks like I have an orb in my hand. Wow. Okay. Anyway, so that reflection was causing issues because the green screen here is not thick enough to withstand the light. Halfway through the conversation, the light in the room changes because the sun went behind some clouds, and my chroma key, which is supposed to key out the green background, stops working. And so the color changes. I turn dark red, and you can see the background, the purple streaks and everything. It just looks really bad. So just a heads up, there's some editing done. I, tried to make it so you guys don't have to suffer through that for too long. But in any case, this is a great conversation. Definitely check it out. Me and Justen Faull talking about his new documentary, Higher Entities, The Lost Tapes. Hey, what's up, guys? Gons here for the Face Like the Sun channel. I have with me Justen Faull. He just published a video called Higher Entities, The Lost Tapes. And the last time you were on, Justen, a bunch of people watched the video talking about the Hollow Earth. And this time we're going to talk about higher entities. But before we do, how you doing, buddy?
Man, I'm doing good, Gons. It's great to be back with you. And man, it was really cool being able to hang out with you last year at the True Legends Conference. We haven't really done any type of broadcast together since that. And so nothing personal. Once we got out of jail in Branson, It was like things just were a little different between us. So
always got to be telling the secrets, man. What are you doing? Spilling secrets.
But no, it's awesome to be back with you, dude. And what's really cool is that you've been my friend now since like 2014. And I praise God for your friendship, man. And it's an honor and a pleasure to be back on with you. So thanks for having me.
Well, it's good to talk to somebody. We were just talking before and how we're about the same age, and we're definitely, I was saying it's slipping quickly. It's all falling apart very quickly for me anyway. But yeah, as you can tell, just real quick, briefly, I'm trying out this green screen thing. So I'm a floating head on the bottom, the bottom right of your screen. So bear with me. If you guys don't like it, then I'll get rid of the green screen.
What if I don't like it? Does my opinion count in this vote?
No.
All right.
No, not really. Anyway, so
I'm trying to have some fun here because we're about to talk about some really dark stuff.
I know, but that's yeah, it's just the way it goes. I think we were too goofy beforehand. We spent some time just hanging out before. But first off, your Faull Brothers logo, are you ripping off the Face Like the Sun new logo with the sideline face? Is that what's happening here?
I think we were actually doing ours before you did yours.
Oh, really? So I ripped off your logo?
Maybe unwittingly, but okay. Yeah. Truth is, we're the Faull Brothers. It's two of us. It's our word against yours.
That's true. Although
you're a lone wolf today.
Yeah, it's okay. It's all right. I'll take the hits. Which and I don't use that logo that much anyway. It's just a logo that I had a buddy design. So it's a pretty cool logo, extra logo for Face Like the Sun. But anyway, that's just beside the point. So you have this video, Higher Entities. I was actually watching it. I'm going to click on it here, and this is oops. Where did Justen go? There's Justen back here. So there's him talking to Tom Horn. What was the motivation for putting the film together to actually, decide like, okay, I'm actually making a documentary on this topic?
It's kind of an interesting story. It goes back probably, I think it was around 2015, roughly. And a good friend of mine and co-producer at Fourth Watch Films is Chad Riley. And Chad Riley had reached out to me and asked me if I'd ever heard of this non-existent group known as the Collins Elite. And at the time, I really hadn't heard of them at the time. But later I found out that they were mentioned in Tom Horn's book, what was it, Exo Vaticana. Mm-hmm. And so there was a little bit, like, it was one of those things where I didn't remember it. But then later on, I was like, oh, yeah, Tom covered this in his book briefly. And so Chad told me a little bit about this group, this alleged group, we'll say, which I am fully convinced that there's truth to this now after my investigation. And that was the whole purpose of this, was to investigate the Collins Elite, what they were they real? Are they still operating today? And so I put it on the back burner. And then I guess it was about 2017, I'm having dinner with Darren Geisinger, who wrote the book Zero G's. Mm-hmm. And it's a fictional story, but it's based on real research. And in his book, there's this modern version of the Collins Elite. And so we began to talk about the Collins Elite while we were eating dinner. And it was my brother and Darren and myself. Matter of fact, Derek Gilbert may have been eating dinner with us that night, interestingly. But we talked about this group. And Derek knew who they were. Darren knew who they were. And so Darren got really excited that I had heard about them from Chad. And so one thing led to another. And we were just kind of praying about which direction the Lord would have us go in our next film. And then we got in touch with some people who had some very interesting personal encounters and stories, either directly with government positions in their career, or they had family that were connected in some of these alien programs with the government. And so we decided that was going to be the direction we were going to go. We were going to investigate the Collins Elite. And very interestingly, it all goes back to the Babylon working ritual, which obviously we'll get into that here in a little bit. But that's kind of the basis of where it all began. I had already studied Babylon working very in depth in my last project I worked on. I don't want to talk about that today. Maybe we can do that another time. But this was a very exciting project for me to really dig into, because there's this claim that there was a group who the government had started this think tank, if you will, and then this group rose up out of it and said that this is dangerous. We should not be communicating with aliens. Now I'm already like jumping ship here, so I don't want to go too deep until we cover some more ground. But
sure.
That's how I got interested in the project.
Yeah, because when I was watching the film, and thank you for giving me like an early viewing of it, but the story that you're tapping into at the Collins Elite is very fascinating, because it definitely ties together a lot of the dots that really supports a lot of research that's out there as well with The Minds of Men. Aaron and Melissa, when they made that film, it was like, wow, there's a lot more going on with those experiments. But your film, I think there was a connection in my head anyway that was made where a lot of those experiments came from perhaps these types of moments, you can say historic moments perhaps, where the US government really did come in contact with some kind of entity, thanks to Jack Parsons and the Babylon working and some of those things that happened where allegedly some kind of portal was opened and entities were freely coming, in and out. And because Jack Parsons was the man who opened it and he blew up in a laboratory before he can close it, those portals may still be open. And that really, even if that whole thing isn't true, it just makes sense with the technology topic that we cover on this channel, on Canary Cry Radio and stuff. We always, cover transhumanism and all that, but it's rooted in all this other stuff, all this technological development that seems to come from somewhere else. And that's something that we don't have to be believers to actually acknowledge, that like this last 100 years has been crazy for humanity because of these little gadgets we have, And so what changed? Like what happened all of a sudden? And that narrative of coming in contact with those entities is really, I think a lot of us see it and, we're like, okay, yeah, that's definitely something that probably happened. But this other part of it, this Collins Elite, this group of perhaps, if I'm being very idealistic, I'd like to believe that the Collins Elite were actual believers just like us, that were like, just happened to be in governments and like saw what was going on and said, hey, red flag, let's kind of talk about this. This is, maybe based on their study of the scriptures or who knows. I would like to believe that there was a group that us as public figures talking about these topics as Christians almost have some kind of lineage in a group within the government that were the good guys. That's my ideal sort of view on who they were. But when it comes to your research,
it's a good feeling.
Yeah. When it comes to your research, what did you find out about the Collins Elite? What rabbit trails did you find?
first, let me comment on what you just said about, if this is real, like if this group was real. Not only did we set out to investigate the Collins elite, but we also wanted to kind of bring in some personal stories of other interdepartmental groups, other non-existent groups, or even other groups that are known as LAPs, which are limited access programs. And with a limited access program, Gons, no one in Congress has to know about it. And anybody who's watching this video right now, and by the way, if Aaron and Melissa Dykes are watching this video, I'd love to talk with you guys. I really appreciate y'all's work. But the LAPs, if you Google limited access program, you're going to find out that there's really not a whole lot of information. Like if there is a limited access program, no one in Congress has to know about it. There may be, it's off the books, off the records, and legally they don't have to disclose that to anybody else because it's top secret. It's limited access.
Right.
It does not exist. Now, we wanted to kind of pull in some other stories in our research, because if we could find other groups in the government or other personal stories that kind of resembled the Collins elite, and how they operated and things that surfaced through those programs, we wanted to use that to kind of get a little bit more justification that this Collins elite group could have been real. You see what I'm saying? Like, we didn't want to just go into one direction. We wanted to look at other areas and see if we can validate that there's reality here. Which, by the way, I talked to Nick Pope, and Nick Pope offered to be a part of the project. It didn't work out for us to go out and film Nick Pope. But Nick Pope is on record telling us that these things, these groups in the government, there are spin-off groups, or what's known as a counterpoint group, that a program begins and then things start going in a dark direction, and then people raise up. It's like a little miniature form of mutiny where these people raise up, they become a counterpoint group, they change their worldview halfway through the program, and now there's a faction in that group. So anyway, Collins elite, let's dig into the Collins elite. In the late 40s, we know for a fact that Jack Parsons was yoked up with L. Ron Hubbard, who the founder of Scientology, and also a very well-known science fiction author who's written books, and some of them have been, at least one of them has been turned into a movie, Battlefield Earth. But L. Ron Hubbard was very much into the occult with Jack Parsons, and there are records that Aleister Crowley had actually reached out to Parsons, and that they had some communication towards the end of Crowley's life. There's some interesting information there. But with that, Parsons was following the rule books that were pretty much written out by Crowley. He was a very strong member of the Lima, getting into this idea of opening portals and communicating with these higher entities, if you will. And so he was a major disciple of Aleister Crowley, and L. Ron Hubbard, he was in the same camp. They both agreed on theology, and that theology was rooted in magic. And so what they did was they started to try to open this portal in the desert. And I don't know how much you've taught on this on your channel, so if I could just kind of give a crash course. Their goal was to bring about this end times Whore of Babylon. And that's their words. They wanted to open a portal and bring about this Whore of Babylon. And what took place out there was just failure. They did it a few times. It wasn't catching. Finally, I believe it was a 2-year window. Finally, at the end of this window, Jack Parsons, who was a major scientific man, he said that the scientific method was proven accurate in this, that they finally achieved success. They finally opened up the portal, and it was a sex magic ritual that took place in the desert, and a woman was impregnated during this ritual as the portal opened. And the belief was that she was going to give birth to this moon child, or to this woman was going to give birth to this entity. It was going to be a human, but this human was going to be filled with a different spirit because it was conceived in this satanic ritual in the desert. And so this happened. A year later, Hillary Clinton is born. Parsons wrote in one of his documents that Hillary Clinton, I'm sorry, let me rephrase that. He wrote in his document that Hilarion was the name of this spirit. So it's interesting that Hillary Clinton was born a year later, and that she and her family ties do have put her in a very, very close space with all of this. Now, that's not something we focused on. We didn't focus on that in this film, but I wanted to just drop those nuggets out there because Hilarion, he wrote the name Hilarion in his Antichrist manifesto. And so Hilarion was what appeared to him out there and allowed this thing to take place.
Well, that's really,
anyway,
that's fascinating too. Sorry, just to jump in, because, and I know we don't want to go down that rabbit hole too much, but Hillary Clinton, we've covered on this channel to have a connection back to the UFO community lightly. He was seen she was seen walking with, I think it was either a Rockefeller. I think it was a Rockefeller, and he handed her a book, and it was about extraterrestrials. So she's been in sort of that realm, and also during the time of before the whole 2016 stuff blew up and everything got crazy. Hillary was out there pushing the whole UFO thing, and I think it was John Podesta who said that the one thing he regrets is that he didn't disclose the UFO thing more while he was, working with the White House. And so there's something there. There's definitely something there where they're obviously not telling the public, but those of us kind of connecting the dots, we see it, and we at least we can look at it and go, yeah, something's probably up there because of the fact that, think of the craziness that's happened because of the whole situation in the last few years, and tie it back to what you're looking at with these higher entities and the history behind it. Doesn't surprise me at all.
Well, Hillary Clinton, if you guys remember, on the trail of the election, Hillary versus Trump, she made some statements about if she's elected president that she was going to be fighting for disclosure. And we have to remember that these politicians that are part of the New World Order, they've been playing the long game. Yeah. This isn't they're not just rushing but it goes back to the entities, to the demonic forces. They've been playing the long game because according to the book of Acts, it's been the end times for 2,000 years, right? Yeah, yeah. So to know that we've been in the end times for 2,000 years, they're playing that long game, and they've got plans. And part of their plans it does include disclosure. But anyway, this idea of Babylon working. So Parsons writes that they were successful in doing this, and being a man of scientific method, you don't stop and you keep working until you're successful. Right. And so that's what he did. And he says they were successful. He and L. Ron Hubbard and the others that were part of this group. And by the way, there would be no NASA if it wasn't for Jack Parsons. That's my personal belief. He was a major player in rocket technology in America. Many people actually believe that JPL, Jet Propulsion Labs, that actually stands for Jack Parsons Labs. Yeah. Very interesting connections there. But and man, maybe I can come back on and talk a little bit more about Babylon working in the future, because there's a whole lot more I could be talking about. But for now, the portal got opened. They claimed that they opened the portal. And what's crazy, Gons, is that immediately paranormal activity, and this is in the late 40s, paranormal activity, UFO activity, spiritual activity, it's all ramping up over there in this desert area and the cities and whatnot that are surrounding it. Well, they're all being affected. And people are now contacting the government saying, what's going on? Yeah, no, I was just going to say Roswell was 48, right? So, or 47. No, it's 47. We've got declassified documents from the FBI that are available to the public through the FBI vault talking about, look, the Roswell story versus what the documents say are pretty crazy, because, you now have talk of multiple crafts, multiple entity. It's not just a little, what do they call it?
An airship or something.
Yeah, they called it a weather balloon. Weather balloon, yeah, that's right. Yeah. But anyway, so all this paranormal activity is happening, and not just in California, by the way. Like it's like you said. You had Roswell, you had UFO activity taking place over in the modern state of Israel. All kinds of weird stuff is happening, paranormal speaking, of course. And so people began to reach out to the government because, back in the 40s, people still trusted the government. Yeah. And they were asking the government, what's going on? We need answers. This is, there's crazy supernatural things that are happening everywhere. What exactly is going on with this? And so the government now has to come up with some type of an answer, because so many people are contacting them. It's one thing if somebody just contacts the government and says, hey, I saw Bigfoot. Okay, whatever. But when you have when you're getting flooded with phone calls, not just in California, but all over the place, it's a big deal. And the government says, okay, we are going to raise up a group that is going to investigate these claims. We are going to put funding into this project, and we're going to give answers to these questions. That is where this group got started. Now, as they got started, they went to Jack Parsons and they said, are you responsible for this? You see, Jack Parsons was already connected. Yeah. He was connected. He was respected. Everyone, people that were in that camp loved him because he was a man of science and occult magic. So the guy was very well respected, and people began to contact him to say, are you responsible for this? Federal these are federal agents that are working on a secret project for the government. They go to him and they say, "Are you responsible for what's going on? We knew a little bit about what you were doing out here, but was this you? Was this your work?" And he says, "I believe it was. I believe I am responsible for opening up this portal." And so that is one of those things that really opened up far more discussion than we could ever imagine, because now they're looking at it as these things are crossing over from another place. It's not a matter of just, happenstance. There's a reason this is happening, and Jack Parsons admitted that he thinks it was his fault. So a little bit of time passes. They now realize that this was all done by supernatural means. This was done by paranormal means. And then back in the 40s, Gons, they used this terminology, supernormal. These things were beyond the norm. This was not something the average Joe was partaking in.
Right.
And so people began to try to figure out, well, how are we going to deal with this? And so part of the solution in the occult world, the belief was that whoever opened the portal had to be the one to close the portal. And that's just the belief in that camp. And so, as you already said in the opening introduction, that Jack Parsons blew himself up in his lab before the portal got to be closed. I don't want to jump too far ahead, but this group that the government set up to investigate all of this, they start to realize that this was done via communication with entities. And so they began to try to communicate with entities, just like Jack Parsons, not in the Babylon working. We don't have information on how they started, but what we find out is that later on, the Collins elite rose up. This small counterpoint group, they spark and they say, you know what? This goes against our worldview. This goes against our Christian worldview. And back in the 40s, I mean, goodness, there was a time when Christianity was very prominent in America, when we had morals and when people were more conservative in what they believed. And so this was one of those times where this group says this is going against our Christian faith. They reported that this group was now partaking in satanic rituals in order to communicate with entities. The same group that started off trying to get answers, they began to go deeper and deeper, and they realized that power could be attained and that information and technology could be given through all of this. Now, I think it's important that we go ahead and talk about FBI document 6751. Let me say that one more time. Declassified document 6751. Anyone who's watching this video, they can go download this from the FBI vault. This is not some conspiracy theory.
Say it one more time. The FBI
document 6751. This is a document that was submitted by a very prominent member of academia. They submitted this document to the FBI, and it outlined that they've known for some time now that we're not dealing with space aliens.
Before you go on, I just tried to pull it up and I got denied. Access denied by the vault.fbi.gov.
Are you kidding me?
Try a different link here. Yeah.
Wow. Because we downloaded it from the vault in our initial research. We've got hard copies of it now. And we've been talking about it. We've been going around and talking about it. We talked about it on the SGT report. A couple 100,000 or more people have already probably gone and looked it up. So it's possible that
it's able to pull it up anonymously. So maybe I'm not allowed to see it as who I am. Anyway, go on. I'm just going to scroll through here and look at the documents.
Okay. So document 6751, it was submitted to the FBI, and this prominent member of academia, he had scholarship behind him, and he was communicating that there was open knowledge now that we're not dealing with space aliens, but we're actually dealing with these entities that were crossing through dimensions. They were coming from what was called the ethereal plane. Now, that's interesting for us, Gons, because we have talked about astral projection. We've talked about New Age practices. And people will come back from the ethereal plane. They'll take an ayahuasca trip or DMT or something, and they'll come back from this ethereal plane and they'll talk about the ascended masters were there. Sometimes they have horror stories of what they experienced in this ethereal world. But this language was being used back in the 40s. And the original FBI agent that received this document, he tried to say that this information was received by supernormal means, that it was, occultic basically, and that, nothing to see here kind of situation. We're just going to, we're going to try to debunk this document. That was because he put a little bit of an introduction as he forwarded it. But here's what's crazy. If the document wasn't real, like if this was not a real threat or if this wasn't real information that the government felt was valuable, why would he forward it to all of these people and then classify it? Why do you classify a document if you don't think there's validity to it?
Yeah.
So clearly the FBI was onto something here. The federal government, based on this document dating back to the 40s, which it's declassified now, we can all go look into it.
Yeah.
But they used language in this document like the locus and the talus. These are words that go back to theosophy. Okay,
Right.
this is a declassified federal FBI document. They classified it for a reason. They believed what it said, and it said that these are not space aliens, but they're interdimensional beings.
Wow.
That's groundbreaking. That nobody's talking about this. Why is no one talking about this? And so I got to just give credit real quick. Chad Riley's the one who fished this document out. I mean, this is one of those documents, if you don't know what you're looking for, you're never going to find it. But right. Chad Riley being the great, I mean, what a blessing it is to have a Chad Riley on our team, because he finds these things. And so we downloaded, over 300 FBI documents that were now declassified, all pertaining to, psychic abilities, ESP, aliens and UFOs, things that the government has been working with knowledgeably since the 40s, knowing that it wasn't actually space aliens. So I think that's kind of important to note, that the federal government, at least factions in the federal government, they knew that they were dealing with spiritual higher entities. And they knew this back in the 40s. And so when they began to make contact with them, this non-existent group that the Collins elite sparked out of, the bigger group began to do whatever they could in their power to try to communicate with these things, pretty much doing similar rituals, if I understand correctly, that Jack Parsons would have been doing to make contact. So Parsons blows himself up in his lab. It's an accidental explosion. He dies, and nobody's there to close what they believe to be an open doorway. So they now are, going forward with this mentality that there is an opening, a rift in the space-time continuum. Now that sounds like science fiction, but these are seasoned federal researchers, agents of the highest security clearance, and they're now trying to make contact. And then the Collins elite apparently validated that they did make contact, and it's not a good thing. So the Collins elite tries to come up with a solution. What are we going to do about this? We have a Christian worldview. And look, you can have a Christian worldview without being a Christian. Let me just make that really clear.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people who will always call themselves a Christian. They're a back row, Sunday only Christian. They go to church, and they basically have a moralistic standard of things, but they don't really walk with Jesus. They've never been born again, but they still have a Christian moralistic worldview. Yeah. It's kind of like the same type of worldview that would say, let's put the 10 Commandments, like the founding fathers, for instance. We have evidence that the founding fathers were not born again Christians, like David Barton has told us in all of his films. But that they were involved in occultism, at least a good portion of them. But they still respected the 10 Commandments, and they still put the 10 Commandments, all over the place. And so there's kind of a fine line there. You can have a Christian worldview without actually walking in the truth of Scripture. But we believe that the Collins elite had some very strange theology. They believed that they could bring about a theocracy, a forced theocracy in America, where they put us back under the law of Moses in order to combat the coming invasion of these demonic entities that were now in cahoots with federal government.
Yeah, that's really interesting. That was one of the things that when I first heard about the Collins elite, which was a long time ago, in one of the early interviews I think Derek Gilbert did, the thing that stood out to me was, oh, these guys want to create a Christian theocracy? That sounds kind of messed up. So my whole perspective was like, oh, that doesn't sound good. That doesn't sound good at all. But in context to what they were dealing with in front of them, it's kind of like, I can understand why they would want to push that, at least at a public level, try to get people on board with something like that, because you can't explain to people like, hey, these demons are coming through this hole, and we better make the full armor of God law, because it's going to be hitting all of us, So I could understand.
They were scared.
Yeah, I would imagine.
We have to understand. Think about it like this. If you could take yourself back to Leave It to Beaver and Andy Griffith, okay? like this is important. Like everyone watching this video needs to think like this. Go back and watch a couple episodes of Leave It to Beaver or Andy Griffith show, where everything is perfect. Everyone goes to church. I mean, it's a clean community. We don't have all of the satanic afflictions that we have today. Like our society now is so dirty compared to what it was back then.
Yeah.
And so back then, if you're working in what you believe to be a Christian government, I mean, that was the mindset back then. Back in the 40s and 50s, they believed that this was a Christian nation.
Yeah.
That was what they believed. And so you're in the government, in the Andy Griffith days, everything's good. You never have to use your gun, that kind of scenario, right? And then all of a sudden, like this group is having to research paranormal activity. And the government already had foreknowledge that these were not aliens, but it was kept on lock and key because it was an FBI document that they didn't want to share with everybody. This goes to show that there are factions in the government that don't always see eye to eye.
Right.
And all of a sudden they see their coworkers, their colleagues are now involving themselves with extrasensory perception, occultic practices, making contact with these interdimensional beings. And this is taking place in the 40s and going on into the 50s and possibly into the 60s from the same group. Matter of fact, we were told by a source that the last remaining member of the Collins elite just died like within the last 10 years. Now, I can't prove this. It might have been last year. I don't know. I hate talking about speculation because none of that can be proved. But the thing is that there were people that got scared and they branched off, and that's what we call the Collins elite. It has nothing to do with the Collins elite family, like the elite family bloodline of, no connection there. But what we do know is that they said that this is dangerous. We don't need to be doing this. Kind of like the warning that Stephen Hawking gave to CERN. It's like if Stephen Hawking is warning you to stop, something must be really bad because the guy was an atheist. But anyway,
when you can scare an atheist about God, you might want to.
Exactly. It's kind of like in Home Alone. It's like, well, look, if Uncle Frank says you shouldn't watch Angels with Filthy Souls, it's probably really bad.
Old school references.
It is. But I found myself really just mind blown by the evidence of old federal documents. Like a lot of these alien UFO documents, these entity documents, they go back. Like they're not new. They're old and they've been classified for so long and they've finally been opened up to public record. And so we began to study the documents, reading through pages and pages of declassified documents, which many of them have blacked out sections. You know how they do. They'll declassify it, but they're going to cover up some of it. And so we began to really dig into this, Gons, and we realized that this is a major conspiracy that started off with good intentions. It started off to try to get answers to what was happening. And then they began to want to go deeper and deeper and deeper. And people began to get engulfed in this form of real spirituality that they're experiencing themselves. They're now communicating with entities, and things began to get, a little uncomfortable for some of the men in the group who were of a Christian worldview.
Right.
So that is the Collins elite. So the question is, can we validate that this really happened? And so we wanted to talk to other people and get some information about other scenarios that are possibly still going on today. We wanted to really dig and try to confirm this by other activities. And so with that, we talked to Stan Deyo. And is it okay if we go ahead and jump into Stan? Are we okay with that?
Yeah, go for it. Yeah. I'm actually going to find a spot here with Stan and go for it. Yeah.
So Stan Deyo, a lot of people, are probably not ready to hear what he has to say. He says some things that are kind of out there sounding. Like if you're just like a regular everyday Joe and you hear an interview with Stan Deyo, you're probably going to think, wow, he's probably a little crazy. But Tom Horn talked to me about Stan Deyo, and Tom Horn is pretty conservative. And he told me that before his house burned down, that he had a newspaper from Britain, somewhere in the UK, but Tom Horn had this big front page newspaper ad, and it was a picture of Stan Deyo with like these other very elite scientists from the UK and I believe even from Australia. I forget how many people were connected here, but you had Stan Deyo standing with these elite scientist guys, and the headline was teaching that these men are working on anti-gravity technology.
Right. They actually had a headline, a whole front cover thing. Wow.
Yeah, and it was like, and so Tom was just wanting me to know that even though Stan might say some things that seem a little out there, that he was really there, really working on these projects that were non-existent. But it was all under the guise of anti-gravity craft. Like the public was told that these guys are working on some heavy duty stuff. And this was advertised in the UK. And so he's kind of a hero over there. So anyway, what happened was Stan Deyo ends up getting
He gets trapped in Australia. He gets extradited into Australia.
Yeah, well, yes. Yeah, so he's working as a secret agent for the FBI. He got recruited. That's the word I was looking for. So he gets recruited by the FBI, and he tells his full story in our film. Like, he explains how it all went down. And he goes over to Australia to work inside of a DUM, a deep underground military base. Mm-hmm. And he's working underneath the surface of the earth with Australian and British intelligence. Now, this is important, Gons, because in our last discussion that we had on the Hollow Earth, we talked about this thing called Operation High Jump, which was a joint task force of America. It was led by America, but it was America, Britain, and Australia all working together to go down to Antarctica, where there was alleged UFO battles and craziness that took place. The mission that they went down there to do got halted really quick. And so, yeah, if people haven't, heard the video we did, I think it's had over 1 million plays now.
Yeah.
But go back and check out the demonic army is beneath our feet. I forget. Maybe you can put a link in the description here.
I'll have it in the cards.
We broke down Operation High Jump pretty in depth in that discussion. So I don't want to waste time. But it's important to note that the three groups, the three governmental agencies, you had groups from America, you had groups from Britain and Australia working on these secret non-existent UFO missions. Well, now they're down in Australia working on, reverse engineering craft and working on anti-gravity technology. Stan talks about technology that allows a human being to walk through a wall.
Right.
Stuff that, and he explained this as low-level toys.
People like him have been looking at that stuff for so long that it's, the capabilities of that technology go far beyond maybe just even walking through walls, which sounds ridiculous to us. But I mean, it's even biblical too, in the sense of it's Jesus getting through stuff and appearing. Sorry, go ahead.
No, the thing that blows my mind about Stan Deyo is that he doesn't miss a lick. Yeah. The guy is if you look at him, and this is one of the cool things about this film is we did it as a live action. You're literally coming with us on the road everywhere we go. You're like a fly on the wall. This isn't a studio documentary. This is a live action. Like you said before we started, it was almost like a mix of reality TV and a movie. It's like both. And so we go around and you can see in everybody's face, we joke around a lot, Gons. I praise God for the joy that I have in Jesus, that I can laugh and cut up. But this film, there's nothing joking about this movie. This is some serious business. You are looking into the eyes of personal stories that people are going to take with them to their grave. They will always have these memories. And when you look at Stan Deyo's face when he's telling his testimonies of all this stuff, this isn't, he's still carrying this weight on his shoulders.
Yeah.
He was exposed to some things. He said that his colleagues that were right above him were working directly with entities. And he explained different types of entities in the film. He was explaining different classifications of entities that he was aware that they were working with in Australia.
Yeah.
But the thing that really caught my attention about Stan is that when he says that there was a battle, there was something that happened down there where agreements got breached, and he said he was told immediately to pack it up and leave. And he's in another country. And look, our government, our CIA and our FBI, they've been known to just abandon agents on the field and never to talk to them again. And they pretty much died. They don't give them any money or help to get back home. It's like when a secret operation goes south, they abandon you, generally speaking. And so what's interesting about that is that Stan made it back, but he was told this is done. He gave a disclosure that they had him give a closing statement, which was supposed to be played in a congressional hearing, which never happened. He was very upset about that. His testimony of what happened and how he was treated in the closeout, he said it was not done properly. And then he gave his full disclosure statement. He says it never got played for the congressional hearing that was supposed to take place. I mean, it was so hush-hush and covered up. But he says that there were what he talked about was very similar to some of the stuff that Phil Schneider talked about. But the difference is that we know Stan Deyo. We have, he is a well-respected scientist. He showed us documents at his house, Gons, of all the diagrams and the scientific reverse engineering, the stuff that they were working on. He has all of this in folders. And so he pulled it all out. He showed it to us. But he told us that he was aware that while he was in the program, he was aware that the federal government prior to him had made a deal with entities. And he was pretty sure that the deal that they kept referring to was the Eisenhower deal. Now, what's interesting about the Eisenhower deal is because you have two events that often get kind of blurred. Matter of fact, I've made error in the past. And so I'm just going to set the record straight here. 1954, I believe it was, you had the Edwards Air Force Base incident. And then 1955, a year later, you had the Holloman Air Force Base incident. Now, the Edwards, that was where Eisenhower disappears and he's nowhere to be seen. It was kind of like when Obama and Hillary disappeared. Remember the media blackout?
Yeah.
The Bilderberg thing?
The Bilderberg.
Well, something similar happened to Eisenhower at the Edwards Air Force Base. And it's kind of lock and key. It's kind of like hush hush because it's like, well, they never admitted that he was meeting with entities. The official story was that he had an emergency and he had to go to a private dentist, at an odd time. It was the story was very weird. So he goes to get some dental work done in an emergency, dental situation, and he's blacked out. Like nobody knows where he was other than he just got dental work done. But the story that we got was that he was talking about a possible treaty with entities. And a year later, you have the Holloman Air Force Base incident, which we break that down in depth in the film on various levels, where you have this event that takes place on the landing strip where UFOs come down and there's a bunch.
Uh-oh. You got cut up a little bit there. You said there was a bunch of, was it crafts? Sorry.
Yeah, there was a bunch of, no, there was a bunch of witnesses this time.
Witnesses, okay.
Yeah, you want me to take that back a little bit?
Yeah. It just froze when you said a bunch. It was kind of funny. Yeah. Your face froze at bunch. Anyway, go on.
So the difference is that you had the Edwards Air Force incident, the Air Force Base incident, where there was no evidence other than hearsay, like because they covered it up and said he was getting dental work. But then a year later, the Holloman Air Force Base, you had witnesses now. You had people who didn't really know what was going on, but they were there and they witnessed craft coming down and then leaving. So people have come forward. There was some video disclosure that came out in the 90s, old school videotape stuff, where people that were there that day, they've given testimony on record that Eisenhower was there and that he met with some type of creatures that were coming down in these crafts.
And then I find out that there's 8 seconds of the Holloman Air Force Base film in the film. So Bob's my friend. I phone up Bob. There's 8 seconds of film in there. And he goes, well, yeah. And I said, you told me to pull the film. And then he said the key words. He said, but it didn't show anything. What it is you see the hills of Holloman, and you see this object, this brilliantly lit object at 6 o'clock in the morning coming over the hills, but it's in a distance. So you don't see it close up, and you don't see the alien when the alien gets out. That's the classified part. So they want you to know that Holloman happened, and they allowed them to use the 8 seconds of the film, but the rest of the film, the classified part, was pulled.
142, I see him over there. Check with Edwards. Make contact with him, Bill.
This is Holloman Air Force Base Control Tower. Identify yourself. What's your tail number? You're encroaching on military airspace.
Along with 2 base Air Force scientists arrive and wait apprehensively. A panel slides open on the side of the craft. Stepping forward, 1, then 2, and a third, what appear to be men dressed in tight-fitting jumpsuits, perhaps short by our standards, with an odd blue-gray complexion, eyes set far apart, a large pronounced nose. They wear a headpiece that resembles a rope-like design. The commander and the 2 scientists step forward to greet the visitors. Arrangements are made by some sort of communication, and the group quickly retires to an inner office in the King 1 area.
Now, interestingly, his granddaughter is a major proponent in the New Age alien, movement. And she's traveling around telling family stories and secrets that Eisenhower really was in bed with the entities and that he met with them and that there was a treaty. So then we have Darren Geisinger that enters into the picture, and he's explaining that he heard a different spin on this story. And he explains that there was this idea that you had the gray aliens and then you had these like tall white Nordics, and that they were presenting a narrative to the federal government that they were on different teams.
Right.
And the Nordics were warning the government, don't sign a treaty with the gray aliens. And the Greys were offering such and such a thing, and the Nordics were offering such and such a thing. But the bottom line was they were presenting this false narrative that they're not on the same team and that the Greys can't be trusted, but the Nordics are the saviors. This is some interesting information because if that's true, that goes back to the idea of the long game we're talking about, where they're going ahead and setting up the scene for the Great Deception to where there's good aliens and there's bad aliens.
Right.
And the good aliens are going to save us. That's pretty much, and that goes back to the Holloman Air Force Base incident.
Yeah, you bring up so many things there that, I mean, I'd love to dig into more of it, but in terms of the Eisenhower meeting and the Greys and the Nordics, I think Stan Deyo was the one that talked. I mean, we talked to Stan, I believe it was like 2012 or 2013 for Canary Cry Radio, and he told us a bunch of his stories. Not everything, but I think you get a little bit more out of him, face to face in the documentary. But he told us about walking into rooms where there were rituals, looked like rituals were being performed, but also that he heard from a guard. I don't think it was him directly, but he had heard from a guard that he had seen one of the entities and that their skin looked kind of flaky. It was kind of like a rainbowy flaky, almost like, I think
oil slick.
Yeah. Oil slick. Or I imagine like, the wings of a bumblebee or something. If you get it just right in the sunlight, it kind of has that glowy feel to it. But that's really interesting too, because it ties into this greater narrative of, the crazy conspiracy theories of reptilians and all this stuff. It kind of, we don't have to necessarily go all the way there, but you can start to see how that kind of lore or mythology is created, like a modern mythology of reptilians, running the governments of the world. That kind of narrative, you can see how it can form with this kind of experience of people having these types of experiences. So
now, I laugh a little bit when you say reptilian. I laugh a little bit, not because I don't believe there's truth to it. I laugh a little bit because of how far spun out of reality it gets.
Yeah.
It's like people will say every little glitch on a YouTube video is the reptilian showing through. And I'm like, okay, guys, come on. I mean, let's be real here. Biblically speaking, Satan is that old serpent, that old dragon.
Mm-hmm.
I don't believe that that's metaphor. I believe that those words are actually linked into the type of angel that he is. And as we broke down in the Hollow Earth Chronicles, we broke down how, a first generation Nephilim, according to myth, if you want to call it myth. I do that just to protect myself, because many people are going to say, well, that's mythology, but it's, different cultures of the world have written about these serpentine qualities of the seraphim. And so you're dealing with these, if it was the seraph that fathered the Nephilim, which many records that we've looked into have said that, then they would have had a reptilian quality. And even back in the day when we were doing L.A. Marzulli stuff on the Fourth Watch, we were talking about, the detachable jaws and some of the giant elongated skulls, which is very
serpentine,
reminiscent of, certain snakes. Mm-hmm. But anyway, without going into too much of a tangent, what you said was right on point when you got that oil slick. I used to work at a pet store when I was in high school, and I loved working in the reptile section because we had some pretty exotic snakes, like some different boa constrictors, pythons, and different things. And that's very much the case. A lot of the snakes, when the light hits their skin, when their skin is fresh, when it's not shedding, it has a little bit of an oil slick look to it. And then snakes that get down in the water and come out of the water, the way that it looks, it's got that oil slick look. So it is interesting that he said that. And he said that that was given to him directly by somebody who was a superior, if I understand correctly, and somebody who he trusted. But the other side of that, I asked him a direct question. I said, tell me about, have you had any personal encounters with what you believe to be an entity, manifested in an earthly form, basically, while you were in the program? And he says that he was at a United Nations meeting. Interesting, because I've heard some, I've heard some crazy stories about United Nations meetings with Carl Teichert. He's told me some crazy stories. So it's like anything goes at these meetings.
Yeah.
And so he's at this meeting, and he said that he ran into a man and a woman who he felt in his heart, his discernment was telling him that they were not from around here. They were not earthborn. And so he said that when he was in the room with them, he felt like it was just a strong oppression. He said he felt like he was like a canary in a cage. I'm not saying that to joke around with, Canary Cry Radio. He literally said that in the film. He said that he felt like he was a canary in the cage and like they were the cat. He felt like they were predators and he was the prey, that they could see Christ in him and that they were demonic. And so he couldn't validate whether or not they were humans, that maybe they were just possessed or they were involved in something or other. But regardless, he felt the oppression being around them, and he believes that they were not human beings. Yeah. So he shared some of that in the film. He shared some very, very interesting stories. And I think that the benefit of watching the movie is that you get to see the reality and the emotion from the people who witness these things. You get to see how real this is. But that kind of, let's move into Tom Horn if we can. I want to try to go through it. Just, I want to lay out some of these highlights here because the film covers a whole lot of stories. So Tom Horn, he's been holding on to some personal family stories for years, and he had told his sister that he was not going to talk about it publicly. I mean, he made a big deal about this. He was like, "Look, I won't disclose this, until you're, gone." Or I don't remember all the details, but he ended up talking about it with us back in 2010, and he told my brother Wes and myself. He told us these stories, some of them at least, off camera. It was just, we were just hanging out with Tom, and we got done filming, and he starts to tell us these family stories, and I'm just like, whoa, like your family experienced this stuff. I mean, it's so crazy that Steven Spielberg has even reached out to his sister because her stories have made it that high up that Spielberg wanted to talk to her, and she got to see, like, Steven Spielberg apparently has collected alien artifacts because he's got so much money. He's been able to buy these high dollar auction items that are, called alien artifacts.
Interesting.
Matter of fact, they said that he had a tent. This is not in the film. This is just a little extra nugget that he had like a tent set up at one of these locations he was working on, and the tent was like loaded down with alien gear. I mean, you just can't make this stuff up. It's crazy.
It sounds like a good business to get into, Yeah, this is an alien shirt. The aliens wore this shirt.
Exactly. Anyway, come on over here and I'll show you my whole tent of alien merch. But no, like apparently he's not just remotely obsessed. He's extremely over the top obsessed with all things alien and UFO. And he's got the elite status quo where he can get into places and he's Steven Spielberg. I mean, come on, he's a hero in the film world to anybody who is a filmmaker, probably. Anyway, all that said, Tom is finally breaking out these family stories on camera for the first time. And he's telling us all this stuff. And we had to, we just kind of had to go and shoot wherever he wanted. We didn't have, that's one thing about this project is the sensitivity of the information that's in this film. It's not a matter of, like we literally just had to run and gun this film, like wherever these people would meet with us. And they didn't want to come out to a studio. It was a matter of, we just got to go and get what we can get because we're trying to get personal stories. And there have already been many deaths linked to people exposing this information.
Right.
That's the thing that Tom warned us. So anyway, Tom's sister, I'm not going to get into all the details, but he tells stories about her, what we would call somewhat abduction like experiences as a child in their house where these little entities were showing up and she was paralyzed. She never got taken out of the house as far as I know. But the reason I'm not telling all the stories is because we got to get through this. We got a lot to talk about. But his sister had alien encounters when she got to the age of puberty. That's kind of interesting because her daughter came up and had the same thing happen at the same age. Generationally, these entities were now attacking her daughter, and she married a guy. This is where the story gets fascinating.
Yeah, this is the part that I actually didn't know about until the film. So go ahead.
Yeah, and she didn't want this shared. I'm surprised that so he actually did this. I don't know if he talked to her before we released the film and told her, but he was not supposed to release this information while she was living, if I understand. But her husband, his sister Vida, she got married, and the guy she was married to had a high security clearance at Los Alamos, which that's another major realm of conspiracy theory surrounding Los Alamos. People come up with all kinds of stories. Some are real, some are probably not. But he's working at Los Alamos, and he comes home one night, starts kicking back a few. And one thing leads to another. A couple of drinks get in him, and he and his wife are having some drinks, and she decides to confess to him that she was, had a history of being harassed by alien entities. It's funny how you'll live your whole life and you cover that up because you want to cover it up. You want to put it down in the deepest recess of your mind. You never want to talk about it again for your own mental sake. But now alcohol gets in you and you're with your husband and you decide, I'm going to go ahead and share some things. So she starts to tell her stories to her husband, and he says, this is crazy because, I'm working in an alien base, basically. And so he starts telling some things that are going on at Los Alamos where he's working, and he's got an extremely high security clearance. The next day he disappears.
Right.
Now, we don't know if the house was bugged. We don't understand. I mean, obviously, you would assume that when you work at a place like this, if you have a certain security clearance, I mean, you see it in the TV shows.
Yeah.
You see when somebody gets a certain security clearance working for, for the Pentagon or something, it's like when they're gone, they're out having dinner. Here comes this like non-existent operation into their house and bugs their entire house.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, his house would have had to have been bugged, in my opinion, because 24 hours later, there's no track of this guy anywhere. Nobody knows where he is. His wife's starting to freak out. She calls over to Los Alamos. They got no record of him. We don't know anything about this. He's not here. We haven't seen him. And so the story goes, Tom breaks this down in depth. He gives like every step of the story in the film. And so one thing leads to another and her trying to find her husband. And so they finally say, look, your husband's gone and he's not coming back. But there's no body. There's no body. And so
I think she was trying to get some of the insurance or some of the just the documentation in line, right? And she was having a problem because with some of that you have to like produce a body, a death certificate, and all this kind of stuff. And she couldn't get hold of some of those things to release some of the the money that was stored up for these types of situations.
Yeah. You can't get the benefits. Like if you don't have a death certificate, the paperwork can't get filled out and you cannot receive the benefits that your husband's been working so hard for.
Right.
And so she worked for the federal government as well. And so interestingly, because of her connections and what she did, she was able to rattle the cage a little bit. She was able to go higher and higher and higher up and finally get some attention. She's saying, look, this is what happened. I'm getting a little sick and tired of all this. We haven't done anything wrong. But now my husband's missing and he worked at Los Alamos. I mean, you start talking like that high up the command about he worked at Los Alamos. We're talking about aliens and then he disappears. So finally, like with nothing else said, it's like, okay, you know what? Boom, here's your benefits.
Right.
Don't ever talk about that. Don't ever talk about this again.
Right. Yeah. Here's everything. Go away.
Yeah. And I mean, maybe even I'm speculating here, but it's like in the movies, it's like, here's a little something extra for your trouble. I don't know if that happened or not, but it's crazy because she had to start talking and dropping facts, Gons. She had to start dropping facts about it all publicly. And they finally answered. That's the kind of stuff we're dealing with here. They don't want this information to get out. And this guy lost his life 24 hours later because he was holding a high security clearance at Los Alamos and he talked. And boom, 24 hours later, he's gone. And there's no trace of the body, no nothing. So I say that just to say that this is some serious business, that when you're working for these facilities, I mean, at any point, you're considered disposable.
Yeah.
You're expendable. They don't care. And so anyway, I wanted to get into that story briefly because Tom goes through and he actually tells quite a few more stories. Very fascinating stuff. His family has a history of where they were living. Some very strange activity was taking place. But he did release those stories in the film that he said he would never release publicly. He finally did it. And I'm very grateful because people need to know this. They need to know that this is not a conspiracy theory. This is very real. And then, Darren Geisinger, he talked about some of the experiments that were going on that were leaked out of the Collins Elite scenario. And some of those experiments were working on a technology to where you could sit in a psychic chair. Now, this kind of gets back into the idea of Stranger Things and the Project Montauk.
Right.
I've talked to Christopher Garetano, and I just want to give him a shout out real quick if I can. Christopher Garetano, he's not a Christian, but the guy's just a great researcher, and he made a film that really shook my walls called The Montauk Chronicles, and it's an ongoing investigation where he goes out and tries to investigate what took place. And when you're looking into that, you're dealing with satanic ritual abuse. Yeah. You're dealing with satanic ritual abuse where people actually think that they experienced things that they didn't, such as time travel back to the times where Christ was crucified. I mean, like, this is the kind of stuff that it's all mind control experiments that the government's doing on people. So people come out of that and they think that they have been on the surface of Mars. Right. They think that they've been back at it's all mind control, psychic mind control. And so what Darren found out was that there were things going on with the bigger group, the group that the Collins Elite was trying to expose, that they were doing very much that type of technology and that type of ritual in these chairs that were like occultic charged objects. And they were working on technology where you could attack somebody psychically and kill them.
Right.
I mean, this is like the stuff of science fiction, but this was going on in the 40s and the 50s.
Yeah.
And obviously, if it was going on there, they were getting better and better and better at what they were doing, and they were making strong contacts with these entities which since the 40s they've been deeming to be interdimensional from the ethereal plane. You know, I mean, goodness, we're talking about just unbelievable spirit realm stuff. This is like right up the alley of what Mike Heiser talks about the unseen realm. Now, Mike Heiser, he has validated a guy by the name of Ray Boeche.
Right.
This is like, without Ray Boeche, we would have not done this project when we did. He's a guy that doesn't give interviews very regularly. He was the former head of MUFON for the state of Nebraska, major player in the UFO community, and he was bringing a biblical perspective to UFOs even back before the internet. You know, I mean, he was heavily engaged in the local UFO community as a Christian,
right,
way back before, you know, we had this internet at our fingertips.
Yeah.
And he grew up with a very strong interest in this type of stuff. But Ray Boeche, he's an ordained minister. He's been a Baptist minister, a Lutheran minister, very much. He's a theologian. I mean, the guy's a scholar when it comes to, and he's also an exorcist. I think that's important to add, is that he's also known as a Lutheran and a Baptist exorcist, which is fascinating. So because of his history, you know, with deliverance, I like to use the term deliverance better than exorcisms, but he's got a strong history here, and he's a theologian, and he's a ordained minister, cross-denominational. And usually I'd be very weary about cross-denominational ministers. It's like, pick a team, you know? No, I'm just kidding. But Ray Boeche, after spending time with him and talking to him, the guy is super sound in his doctrine. I mean, this guy, he knows the word of God. He is sound in his theology. And the most important thing is he's filled with the Holy Spirit. Like, when you're with him, you feel that connection.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I mean, like, this guy is awesome, and he's on fire for Jesus, and he loves evangelism, but he also has a whole lot of other stuff that he can offer.
Yeah.
And so he is, he's got all this stuff in his history and his, you know, on his resume, if you want to go that route. And he gets contacted via phone by these two men who claimed to be secret agents of the Department of Defense of the United States. And he's like, this is interesting. Okay, these guys are telling me some things involving UFO and aliens and entities. And they needed to meet with him privately. They said, we need to go over some things with you, but we can't really do too much of it on the phone. We really need to meet with you privately. And so I guess, you know, he prayed about it, felt like it was okay to meet with them. And so he meets with these guys. And before I tell you this, I just want to go on record again. Mike Heiser has vetted this guy.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Mike Heiser is extremely, what's the word? He's extremely scrutinizing when it comes to hashing through peer-reviewed research.
Yeah.
And so if Mike Heiser, and I, you know, I don't agree with everything Mike says, you know, we have difference of opinions on certain things.
I'm kidding.
Yeah. but what's amazing about Mike, it's like if Mike vets somebody who might be questionable.
Pretty strong stamp of approval, if you will.
It really is. And so Heiser had vetted him. And as a matter of fact, Heiser knew him, knew about his research and knew about his claims. And he vetted him years ago. And so he goes and meets with these guys. These two guys from the Department of Defense, and they're telling him that they're involved in a federal group that doesn't exist, a limited access program again, and that the group is doing what he could only describe as satanic rituals inside of closed doors, inside of federal funded facilities. So what we're dealing with here is federal projects that are funded likely with taxpayer dollars, because that's generally how it works, right?
Yeah.
And they're using our tax dollars to perform satanic rituals and to open up another rift. They're trying to open, and they were successful. They opened up, they were in full communication with some group of entities, and they began to have a mentality of a we can do better mindset. This is what Ray said. I'm actually like pretty much quoting him right now. He says that what started out as an investigation turned into a we can do better mentality. We can go deeper. We can communicate with higher entities. We can breach things that have not been breached thus far on the timeline. So they began to have a lust for more power, more communication, more technology, more rituals. And really, that's what happens in the occult, because, that's why people move up in the occult, because it's more and more and more. They they have the mentality of, we can do better. And so he says that these two members of the DOD, they broke down all this stuff, and he tells the story in the film. Like, he just goes through and lays it all out, and how, he even describes that they inferred that there was human sacrifice involved, and that this was all happening on federal, inside of federal facilities. And that there was a small faction of these men who were convicted that this was evil, and that they did not openly talk about it, but that they wanted to do some alternative research. And part of that alternative research was to bring in, what they were told was a priest that had a very supernatural worldview in regards to aliens and spirits and demons. And so they meet with Ray Boeche. They had and I believe, if I remember correctly, I believe he said they met twice. But they had multiple phone conversations. But here's where it gets really interesting. So everyone's telling us that we need to meet with Ray Boeche. Tom Horn says it. Derek Gilbert's telling us this. Of course, Darren Geisinger is like, you got to talk to Ray. You got to talk to Ray. And everybody's pointing to Ray Boeche. Well, Ray Boeche is not talking to us.
Right.
I made contact with him, but as soon as I told him that I wanted to meet with him, I wanted to talk to him, and I wanted his story. I wanted his testimony on record.
Yeah.
Well, he was very cordial with me, and he says, well, I'm real busy right now. Things are really, with his job, and he had some things going on. And he says, I'm gonna have to get back to you on that. So, weeks passed, and we're like, wow, we're already on this investigation. And like, if we don't get him involved, because he's like, everyone's saying he's the guy to talk to, like, we have to talk to him. And finally he comes through, and he's like, I'll do it. He says, y'all are going to need to come out here. And, and I'm like, well, okay, let me get some details. I'm a filmmaker. I need details. I need a production schedule. And of course that got thrown out the window, because Ray won't even give us a day or a time. All we had was, I'll do it, but I need to work out the details. So we finally get out to Nebraska. Like, he told us the window he would do it in, but we didn't even know until the morning of. Like, he wouldn't give us any details. He wouldn't tell us what time we're going to meet, anything. He wouldn't even agree on the place and the time until right beforehand. Like, we got a text message, and he's like, okay, we're going to meet you here at this time. That's pretty much how that went down. And so he met us at our hotel room. He wanted to meet in a private hotel room, but we didn't even know that that's where we were going to meet right away. Like, everything was just, it was all last minute. Like, he didn't want to take any chances that anyone was going to be able to bust in on his discussion with us, because apparently the information that he knows and the men that reached out to him were older. And as far as he knows, they might not even be alive anymore. So it was very interesting. Mike Heiser vetted his stories. He vetted this guy's testimony, and he vetted him as an individual. So we had the honor and the pleasure of meeting Ray and his wife. And it was crazy. And then what's really wild about all this is, like, we get home and we're finishing the film, and the film gets released. And now Ray is dealing with some major health issues, like some strange type of cancer that he's fighting right now. And this was not going on when we filmed him. And so I'm not trying to connect any dots here. I'm not trying to be Mr. Conspiracy Theorist. But I say that just to say, pray for Ray Boeche. If you're watching this video and you're a born again Christian, please pray in Jesus' name for the healing of brother Ray Boeche. He is a true brother in Christ, and he's done a lot to try to bring out and expose the alien agenda before the internet was even a thing. So I just wanted to mention that. But Ray told us some of the craziest stuff I've ever heard, and it was all being done in a modern scenario. We're not talking about the 40s or the 50s or the 60s. This has been going on. And so, we talked to Nick Pope. Now, Nick Pope wasn't in the film, but people know Nick Pope. He's got some connections with ancient aliens, and, he's a former British intelligence. Nick Pope, I believe he was in Arizona at the time, but I talked to Nick Pope. He was a very cool dude. I've always enjoyed some of his work. But Nick Pope told us that, he gave a little information to me and to Tom Horn separately, because Tom Horn has got connections with Nick Pope as well. I think Tom's interviewed him. But Nick Pope told us in so many words that there's enough information that he's seen that there's a very good chance that the Collins elite not only existed, but he says that there are groups just like that in all the governments. He says that there are groups, counterpoint groups, that are enough counterpoint groups in the alien stuff with governments that he says there's no reason to doubt this. Now, he didn't tell us that he had evidence on the Collins elite, but what he said was kind of short and to the point. And now he doesn't take the demonic view on everything like we do. Right. You know, he's got a different worldview. But regardless, he did validate the fact that there's very good evidence that this is going on in various governments. And look, the fact that Stan Deyo was involved in underground bases and was working on these projects, yet he was a Christian and he began to have issues with some of the stuff going on.
Yeah.
It's evidence that there are factions in government today. Some of them are communicating with these things, some of them aren't. But the reason I bring that up is because we have evidence now that even dating back to the 40s, that there have been things going on with high up government groups, you know, communicating with what we would know to be higher entities, fallen angels, demons, whatever you want to call them. We chose higher entities as a title because the people that are communicating with them do believe that they are like ascended master type level of, you know, like they look at them as a godlike entity. They are higher, and technically they're higher than us in their, you know, what people, what atheists would call evolution. We don't believe in that, but people who don't have Jesus, they look at it differently, and so they are looked at as higher entities. That's a very popular term in the New Age movement, higher entities. The fact is, they are going to be made very low when judgment comes, and Jesus always wins every scenario. So I want to be very clear. We're not looking at them as higher, but that's what we call the film because that's the terminology that gets used in the New Age movement about higher entities. I don't know where we are on time. There's a couple other things that maybe we can hit on. I don't know. You're directing us here. So
well, I think let's see where are we at with the. I think we're still good. I guess I've been changing colors over here. It looks like I'm like dark pink now. Awesome, fun. This is what I get for trying out this little system here. But yeah, you know, I think on this channel we talk so much about transhumanism, technology, the technocracy, all this stuff. And you know, actually, I'm going to pull something up. You can't see it, but I'll show the audience here. This is actually this is on indiegamesplus.com, and the game is called Devotionalia: Calls Out to Gods Through Rituals. And basically in this game, you follow a high priest going about their daily tasks and preparing votives, sacrifices, and rituals. And you get to like kind of just pick out the rituals and kind of, you know, become the high priest type of thing. And you can see some of these like, you know, I guess seances or whatever they are with this game. But there's stuff like this out there a lot now. And I think it ties into this greater thing of how we are being treated by these entities as basically their vehicle to somehow return or manifest or something. Because it feels like, you know, there's you're probably familiar with Dr. David Jacob.
Yeah.
He's a doctor. I don't know if he's an atheist, but I know he's not a believer. He's not a Christian. But he has, we interviewed him, and he wholeheartedly believes, based on his research, that there is this program. There's some kind of program running in the background that is making a human hybrid so that these alien beings can infiltrate our society. And they're doing it through a sort of slow infiltration into human genome, like a human genome type of thing. And he talks about the hybrids and the cobrids and there's all kinds of stuff he gets into, but I feel like that and this idea of us using the technology with stuff like this, as game like Devotionalia or any other thing out there, it's really the same thing unfolding, because it all kind of goes back to the human mind and like the power of the human mind and all this kind of stuff. Ben Rich, he was the head of skunkworks for Lockheed Martin. And I've talked about this on the channel before, but he basically is reported that he mentioned that, you know, they have the technology to bring ET back to the stars. And one of the ways that the technology, the UFO technology, works is based on some kind of mind machine interface. And so there seems to be a greater connection point with all of these things, these technologies, the VR, all this stuff being an outworking of the kind of history that you're talking about within our governments, within the higher ups and all this stuff, interacting with these higher entities and bringing about the development of not just a cultural, because culturally we're seeing it. The last week's Canary Cry News Talk, we talked about some guy, and I don't necessarily want to show the whole image here because it's really disturbing, but basically doing the alien look, like the forehead shaved. I'm going to send this to you. Serpent eyes and alien cheekbones. Daglara, trans-species aesthetic.
Oh yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. That's actually real popular these days, and people have been doing that for even back in the early 2000s, where they would get the tongue cut in the middle.
Right.
They get these implants to kind of create reptilian-looking nodes on their head. I mean, it's creepy stuff. It's very demonically inspired. Tattooing the eyeballs.
Right. So all those things seem to be an outworking, a continued outworking for us to accept these entities, either the good guys or the bad guys, right? That you were talking about that narrative, which I found interesting, that in reality, these Nordic types, perhaps they have biologically engineered these alien gray types who are allegedly soulless, and they're more like meat suit robots that they kind of just follow orders. And that they are going to be presented as the enemies of humanity, and then the Nordic types will come in and say, "Hey, we're the savior. We're going to help you guys, beat the gray alien." I've heard that narrative, and I don't know how it fits into the biblical prophetic vision. And I mean, some people probably could make it fit, and there probably is some passages that seem to allude to things like that. But in general, it seems like the Great Deception does have something to do with a presence of these entities that are going to claim to be something they're not. But it really just ties into when we talk about the days of Noah, Jesus in Matthew 24 discussing that whole thing. It's here, like we're living it now. And these people that are coming out talking about it, they are proof, in my opinion, that the trickling in of these entities, especially in the higher realms of, I mean, think about the everything that we've talked about today, the experiences. Like Stan Deyo can have a whole movie. He's a whole movie arc with his life story. Ray Boeche, same thing. These guys have these stories that are all, major motion picture worthy. They're these crazy experiences. And they are things that in the context of our modern world, they're reacting differently. People probably had encounters with demons and stuff like that all throughout history, but something about this age that we're in now, this era, has presented us this opportunity to go further and push, and people like Jack Parsons being able to do Babylon working in the desert and all this kind of stuff. The technology that has been, developed in our hands has all of a sudden become this tool to summon demons, basically. And that was always going to happen, it seemed like. And that was maybe the reason why God, dispersed the languages at the Tower of Babel, because that's exactly what was taking place there. So there's so many parallels
Jacques
here.
Vallée. I mean, like if anybody who's studied the works of Jacques Vallée, he laid out how throughout time, and I think we actually talked about this in the film in the beginning with Derek Gilbert, how if you study throughout the course of history, then you find out like the UFOs didn't always look like little shiny discs. Like the deception that the entities were bringing, it was always going to be based on the times. Like they were, and it goes back to what Aleister Crowley said, that today they're calling them angels and demons, and then tomorrow they're going to call them something else.
Right.
They're going to meet people where they're at. And I said this on the SGT report recently that we're dealing with different types of spiritual warfare. Like spiritual warfare is changing. Mm-hmm. It's looking different than it used to look, and they're these demonic forces, they're working with what they have. Like I said before, they're playing a long game here. And part of that is going to be to shapeshift, no pun intended, but to shapeshift how they're approaching mankind and how they're going to look to humanity, how they're going to present themselves in masquerade. But let me comment real quick on something you said about these guys that are wanting to look like aliens. It's nothing new, because if you go back into the old cultures like South America, where the Nephilim were predominantly worshipped as superhuman, we've got all these mummies down in South America that show. I mean, even people who deny the whole elongated skull, they say, well, that's all cradle boarding. Well, no, it's not. We've already proven on my podcast, and you've probably talked about it, that there's evidence. They've got fetuses, mummified fetuses inside of the womb that have elongated skulls, and these are on display in Paracas. So it's like you don't cradle board a fetus,
right?
But the reason I bring this up is because nowadays they're wanting to look like we're told aliens look like. They're wanting to look like the modern manifestations of the Greys or the Nordics or whatever these people are experiencing on their trips when they're entering into the spirit realm, on their drugs, their channeling. They come back from that experience and they want to try to make themselves look like these enlightened beings.
Right.
Well, that's exactly what was happening with the old cultures of the world, is that they were, even in ancient Egypt, people wanted to look like the gods, that they believed that's how the gods looked. That's all they knew. And so the elongated skulls, well, they tried to mimic that by cradle boarding and doing these other things, or the long necks. I mean, as a kid looking at National Geographic, you see some of the craziest looking cultural absurdities coming out of Africa, just demonically inspired, African tribes, stretching their necks with the rings and cradle boarding. And it's one thing to wear like a big hat, like a mitre, to look like you got a big head. But it's another thing when that hat comes off and your skull is really filling up that hat. There's something going on there.
Right.
But I mentioned that just to say that this is not a new idea. They've been trying to mimic what they believe their gods to look like since the beginning. And so cultures and times have changed. And so now we've got people trying to mimic the reptilians and these other entities, which, by the way, there are reports. I forget who it was that was on Joe Rogan, or there was some podcast this guy was on talking about an ayahuasca trip. It might have been Graham Hancock. I think it was Graham Hancock that Chad Riley said that he talked about having an encounter. And again, I could be wrong on the name, but one of these predominant guys that are pushing ayahuasca as a good spiritual thing.
Right.
He talked about having an alien experience. One of these prolific speakers spoke about having an encounter with a gray alien while they were in the other realm on DMT or ayahuasca. But
yeah, I've spoken to people who have this individual had a testimony actually that he was a big time druggie, was on LSD, was in the desert, and he actually had an encounter with these grays, and he actually called for Jesus to come intervene, and in that moment the whole hallucination stopped and he was saved in that moment. So these are real things. People experience these things, and there's a solution here. That's kind of the thing. The reason why we talk about these issues is because the darker things get, it's like the more obvious the light becomes, and I think people that investigate these things, it really becomes clear if you're going down the path of the wheat or the path of the tares with this, because if you get involved, and I bring up someone like Dr. Stephen Greer, for example, he's gone down this path of like, they're all good guys. They're all benevolent. They're here to help us. Here, come to my camps for, $3,000 each and sit out on a field and I'll summon them, or whatever he's got going on.
Yeah.
I mean, that's basically what he's doing. That sentiment, it's freaky to think about, but it's kind of like the future of politics. It's the future of geopolitics. It's all involved. It's going to have this extra dimensional element to it where people are tapping in and all this stuff, but it's not just a woo-woo thing anymore. These entities seem to be more comfortable appearing to us, not just in like a paranormal sense, but whatever, like you were talking about, whatever, fits the modern milieu. But in a sense, it's kind of like, it doesn't matter their presence, because ultimately they want to destroy humanity. They know where they're headed. They're headed for the lake of fire. So they know that the more people they can take down with them, because the lake of fire, hell, wasn't made for us. It was made for the devil and his angels. So that's the purpose of hell. So for us humans, we're caught in this little area here where you can easily follow them to the pits of hell, or you can find salvation in Christ. So it's a really interesting topic that seems so crazy, right? But then also just gets right at the heart of, if you're a believer, especially, what the whole thing is about, what this whole entire thing is about, this cosmos, all the purpose, all that stuff. So, I congratulate you on making this film, because I think it's a good documentary to just have in your back pocket, to be able to reference and to be able to sit there and watch the real people, Ray Boeche, the Tom Horn telling a story, Stan Deyo telling a story. And I think you have others in the film with Darren Geisinger, which I was showing his book, 0 G's, which he gave me back in Branson a year ago. But, these folks, we're all talking about this issue, and I think it's going to fall on deaf ears for most believers, most people that are running churches and stuff, but it's becoming harder and harder to ignore it. And culturally, it is.
And the thing about this film is that, we're diving into a different area, and
right.
What blows my mind here is like, this stuff is not being talked about anywhere. Like there might be one or two people, rattling off a little bit here and there, but for the most part, like, we wanted to bring forward like a different segment of the alien deception that seems to just be sitting in the clouds right now. I mean, nobody's talking about this, and I mean, let alone.
Sorry. I just want to chime in because I think what's happening is there's a little bit of, and I have noticed this, especially after about 2015, especially after like the flat Earth thing became a big thing, and I understand there are still people that investigate that and all that, but there's this fatigue of the whole alien deception in the world of like fringy conspiracy people, because, or at least Christian believers, because it seems like, oh yeah, we figured that out. Like it's the demons, it's Nephilim, whatever. We figured it out. So what's next? The Earth is flat. Whatever is, they're on to the next thing, and it seems like there's a burnout. Like people are just burned out about this topic. But I like what you did here because you sort of bring it back to, okay, what's the documented information here? What's the actual personal experiences? And let's kind of put that together and present it to people, because it not only does it reinvigorate the conversation, but it shows that these are real things. They're not just, it's not just a fantasy book or, a sci-fi thing to tap into. It's more real. And that's, I think, what people are looking for is the real stuff. So I commend you for making the film.
No, thank you. I appreciate that. And that was like one of the things that we were excited about, was to be able to tap into some areas that are just, they're overlooked. And I mean, look, we can all agree that there's something going on with UFOs and aliens, but to be able to tap into things at what I would call like a federal non-existent level, to be able to tap into those things with actual documents, with actual eyewitness accounts. It's a game changer for some people. Like this is going to be the missing link film for certain people that were on the fence, because it's like now we're presenting, men of God who were either involved in some of these programs, connected with those involved, or family was involved. And so being able to present that, my hope and prayers that people will be able to watch this and realize, and even be encouraged. And the fact is, we can't just move on to the next big thing. I mean, we have to be keeping an eye, because this is
the
in
thing.
our opinion,
it's like the big thing.
Yeah, this is the thing that is continuing. Like we've said several times, this is a long game. This is not just somebody looking to hit a fast lick. This is the long game. It's been going for a long time. And look, from the beginning of time, where things have been recorded as governments of the world, and cultures around the world that have been recording and documenting their history according to their people, whether we call it mythos or whether we call it oral tradition.
Well, another frozen moment. Let's see if we can get through this one.
And controlling.
Oh, okay, you're back.
We end up with this massive. We end up with this massive, treasure trove of cultural stories that validates that since the beginning of time, higher entities have been controlling and manipulating the governments and the cultures of this world, and that it's nothing new. It's been going on since the beginning of time. That's why we brought Derek Gilbert into the project, because he's an expert historian on a lot of the old world views on this stuff. We were going to bring Michael Heiser in. We talked to Mike, but just our schedules, we couldn't get things lined up. But this is a very fascinating topic to dig into, and I hope it's well received. The film is done in a creative way. It's done in a retro wave 80s guerrilla filmmaking format. Like old film, but we had a lot of fun doing it, and I hope it's well received.
Yeah, it goes back to that passage. I think it's Matthew 4. I'm trying to pull it up here, but basically, Jesus gets taken up to the mountain, the high place, and Satan basically says you can have all this for worship, and I think the same offer has been given to all the kings of the earth ever since the time of Jesus, and I think many of them have taken the offer. And that's what we're seeing manifest in our culture today. And again, the conversation needs to continue to take place. And hopefully this is something that, you can share with your friends and family and talk about, because, it does, people are oversaturated with information. But again, the way you did it with no flash, no visuals really, other than the camera, the individual speaking, I like the way you did it. And just one more time, where do people go to find the film?
fourthwatchfilms.com. You've probably had it up at some point in the talk, but Fourth Watch Films, all spelled out, FOURTHWATCHFILMS.com. We've actually got a promo right now. You can get the DVD of Higher Entities, or you can get we have a double feature where you can get Hollow Earth Chronicles and Higher Entities for 20% off right now. or you can stream it immediately. Some people are ready to watch this thing immediately. They want to go ahead and watch it. Well, it's all there linked up at fourthwatchfilms.com. And we've got some pretty interesting characters that we were blessed enough to get together in this film. And I tell you, I want to say one more time, things are getting crazier and crazier with our culture and with world government and just the direction everything is going. And I think it's very important that we are able to document these things dating back in American government and politics back in even to the 40s, because here we are now approaching 2020. And I don't know if this is going to air in 2019 or 2020, but regardless, like here we are at the threshing floor of it is. And to think that our government at the highest levels has been working continuously with what they're deeming to be extra-dimensional or interdimensional entities. And the terminology that they throw around in these documents is right out of the playbook of Thelema, right out of Theosophy. It's crazy stuff. I mean, like you can't make this stuff up. They knew what they were doing back then. People were scared about it. They tried to warn people. People have lost their lives for much less than the information that these people released in this film.
Yeah.
So I hope people will check it out and enjoy that.
Yeah. And I appreciate that. And I think that's Tom Horn kept warning you in the film, just be careful. And I've heard
he lost his brother-in-law. I mean, his brother-in-law got killed because of this. So, I mean, obviously it's personal to him, And I know Aaron and Melissa Dykes, they were warned, be careful when you go down this trail. We're willing to, people like you guys are willing to risk your life basically to at least put this type of information together. And look, I probably think that there's certain areas that, maybe you didn't want to go down, not just because of your own safety, but perhaps, there's just no point in digging into certain areas, do as the Lord leads you. But I think it's important for people to understand that like this information is really stuff that really bad people don't want you to know. They really don't want you to even consider it. They don't want it to even be a thought in your mind in the daytime. They just want you to watch your Netflix shows like the new Messiah Netflix show coming out. And, just get your vaccines and just be a good slave, And what's really behind it seems to be entities that are not from here and that don't have humanity's best interest in mind. So, again, thank you, Justen, for taking time to talk about your film. And hopefully you guys out there will go check it out and go grab a copy and, support the whole ministry that they're doing because, him and his brother, I think you guys just kind of traveled around and made this film happen, right? There was no, look, people are always asking there, there's always somebody out there that has a problem that we sell DVDs and live streams. Right. I want to go on record. Like we've given away so many copies of every film we've ever done. But when people understand that it costs a lot of money to travel around the United States and to interview people or to pay to have them travel out to you, and then you've got, you got to work on it for 8 to 11 months to get editing done and everything else. I mean, it's a lot of work that goes into it. So we pray that, that we can continue to do this. It's a blessing to us to be able to put information out there in a format that's entertaining and in a format that can be shared with others. And that's one thing I love about people buying the DVDs is that they're able to pass them around and share them with family members and check them out with friends. We were just over at Michael Lake's place, Dr. Michael Lake. Mm-hmm. He was taping one of his Kingdom Intelligence briefings, and so we go over there, and and he's been so supportive of us. Like he has rooted us on from the first film we put out. I didn't realize like he paid for all of our films, and I'm like, man, I would have given you a copy because But Michael Lake, he had a copy of Hollow Earth and a copy of Higher Entities that we gave him, even though he already had them. And even that day, he was lending those out. Like he says, this is great because now I have copies that I can lend out that are not my own personal copies.
Right.
And so like while we were there, he lent out the films. And so, I mean, that's what I want people to do. I want them to lend them out and let people see them and watch them and just absorb whatever it is that they can take from all this. But at the end of the day, people supporting our ministry by buying the films, that allows us to continue to do this and continue to put out a new film every year.
Yeah.
So we are greatly appreciative of everybody that supports our ministry by either watching it online or by ordering the DVDs. So thank you very much, everybody.
Very cool. Dude, the 2040s are probably going to be kind of gnarly. Lest the Lord returns and, puts an end to all this. when we get to the 2040s, it's about 100 years since a lot of that crazy UFO stuff started happening, at least openly, in the United States. So it'll be interesting to see where we'll be at in the next couple decades. Maybe we'll be doing live stream VR, in-person image. I don't know, something like that. DNA.
Who knows,
talk.
Man?
You just
it's
upload
crazy.
my DNA to you, and then we can have a conversation. Anyway, all right. Thank you, Justin.
I don't want your DNA uploaded, bro. Just so you know,
you were saying how Asians just stay younger, so maybe we are already genetically engineered, and you do want my DNA to stay younger.
I didn't think about that. Maybe I'll pray about it.
All right, Justin. Thank you so much for your time, man.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much, man. God bless, bro.